If you watch my Alaska trip videos from 2024, you know that I spent a lot of time riding in the rain. As any motorcycle traveler knows, at some point over the course of a long trip, you are going to have to deal with rain, and from my experience, doing so comes down to three things: attitude, gear, and technique. The first and probably most important aspect of riding in the rain is having a good attitude. No one likes to ride in the rain, but rather than getting angry or anxious about it, the best course of action is to just give in. Believe me, this is not always easy. Bucket loads of water are falling from the sky and temps may have fallen and you may not be able to see very well. All of these things may be true, but you are not going to change any of them with hours of worry. A couple of years ago, I was up in Vermont and a heavy weather front moved in. Rain was forecast for the entire 4-hour ride home, and I basically had two choices: spend another night or two in a hotel to avoid the precipitation, or suck it up and make the wet trek home. I was prepared, I had good gear, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. I was feeling good physically, and rather than view the day as a fast sprint to get home as soon as possible, I realized that I was in for a marathon. As long as I could see and I felt comfortable that other commuters could see me as well, I would continue to push on. If the circumstances changed, then I would pull over and find a place to hunker down. Does this mean that there are no times when you shouldn't ride? Well, no, of course not. If I see a weather forecast for tornadoes, hail, or lightning, then it might be time to ride around the storm or to take a down day, right? You should always use your head. During my 2024 trip that I mentioned a little bit ago, I was leaving Duluth, Minnesota, and the forecast did not look very good. So I started to make up all kinds of horror stories in my head. But ultimately, I decided to push on, and all of my consternation about potential problems turned out to be 15 or 20 minutes of hard rain. Really no big deal. The problems we make in our heads are usually much worse than reality. Part of having a good attitude comes from the fact that you have done your homework and prepared for wet conditions. So that's where choosing good gear comes into play. And over the years, I have tried all kinds of setups for inclement weather. In 2010, I jumped on my Victory Vision and rode the Blue Ridge Parkway down to Nashville, Tennessee. During this trip, it rained almost every day. Not all day, but during the afternoons, thunderstorms rolled in and ruined my camping plans. During this ride, I was a novice motorcycle traveler and I had no waterproof gloves or boots, and my jacket was mesh with a waterproof liner that could be snapped in and out of the jacket. Now that sounds good, right? I should have been all set. Well, wrong. This was a woefully inadequate setup. The rain layer worked to some degree, but the outer mesh got wet, cold, and heavy. It didn't fully dry out for about 3 days. I had another large waterproof jacket that I threw over my riding gear, and that kept me drier, but unfortunately the rain jacket had a hood, and I spilled water all over the lobby of the hotel I was staying at for the night. I just looked at the woman behind the counter and we laughed. As I said, I was new to this motorcycle travel thing, and I knew nothing. After this adventure, I progressed to rain suits. I bought a Joe Rocket setup and carried it around with me everywhere for several years, trying to always be prepared. The problem with rain suits is that they take up a lot of space in your saddlebag, and of course you have to stop and put them on, and of course take them off and put them on and take them off again over the course of a day where you might have on and off threats of rain. Because this is such a pain, myself and many of my riding partners would end up just trying to push through storms rather than stopping and putting on the gear. Now, also, when you did put on the gear and it was hot outside, well, you got just as soaked from sweat on the inside as you would have if you rode through the rainstorm. After doing this for a few years, I finally decided to spin the bucks and get a climb jacket and pants set up for my motorcycle travels. Yes, the initial cost was terrifying, but after using it on a few rides, I was very glad I had it, and I got over that expense shock really quickly. Gore-Tex and its derivatives are not perfect. If it rains long enough and hard enough, some dampness will find its way in. Water is pretty amazing in its ability to find every crack or exposed zipper. Also, these types of products need to be maintained properly in order to remain effective. This requires that you reapply a coating of waterproof spray after washing. I went years without reapplying it to my climb gear, but eventually it did wear out. I now do this on at least a yearly basis. For my 2024 return to Alaska, my climb jackets were getting a little long in the tooth, so I decided to give Aeros Stitch a try. I had heard good things about their gear, and so far I love my Aeros Stitch Darien jacket. And with the additional items suggested by Andy Goldfine, the founder of Aeros Stitch, my rain gear was the best I have experienced while traveling. During this journey, it rained almost every day between leaving home and re-entering the United States some 30-plus days later. The key to staying comfortable, warm, and dry was layering. This is my layering scheme that allowed me to stay comfortable. 1. I wore a set of LD Comfort base layers both on the top and bottom of my body. I used the long tights and long sleeve base layers in most conditions. Next, I had an insulating layer that was one of those synthetic down jackets. Over that, I wore an Aeros Stitch waterproof, windproof inner layer. This layer not only blocked some of the cold wind hitting my chest, but it trapped any of that water that might make its way past a stray zipper. Over that, I wore my Aeros Stitch Darien jacket, which worked great the entire trip. For pants, I was wearing the Climb Badlands Pro, again lined with Gore-Tex. To keep my hands dry, I used the Aeros Stitch triple-digit glove covers, and these things, they were really lifesavers. And finally, I used the TCX X Desert Gore-Tex boots that are no longer available, but there are similar things out there. When you list all of these layers out, I know it sounds like a lot, but in reality, everything is really light and easily packable. This setup was by far the best I have ever used. It worked flawlessly during my 50-day adventure. In particular, as I mentioned, those Aeros Stitch triple-digit gloves and that inner windproof, waterproof layer, they were really lifesavers in keeping me warm and dry during these wet and cold conditions. If you want to check out any of this Aeros Stitch gear, well, please use the link in the description of this video, or you can go out to my website at livingofftheslab.com. So let's finish off this video by talking about technique for riding in the rain. Riding on wet roads is not as scary as some may think it is. You still have 80–85% of your available traction, and by simply slowing down and being more deliberate about your actions, you should have no problems. Of course, if you insist on riding just as fast as you would when dry, well, you may find yourself in trouble. Normally, I ride about 5 to 10 miles an hour over the posted speed limit. When it rains, I simply slow down to that limit and find myself to be in full control. But the key is to stay well within your comfort limits. Slow down by 5 to 10 miles an hour, again, and you should be fine. I also try to avoid quick maneuvers that will eat up my traction. When it's raining, I brake early and slow more for corners than I do when it is dry. That reduces the lean angle required to get around that corner. I also give the vehicles in front of me a lot more space. Even if I have some tailgater behind me, well, I create even more space. I don't want the guy in front of me to stop and force me to get hard on the brakes. Of course, that's going to mean that the guy behind is going to have to get on his brakes too. Again, I want to avoid that condition, so I give the vehicles in front of me more space. And this is where that attitude comes into play. As I said before, riding in the rain is a marathon, not a sprint. And screw everyone else who is in a hurry, let them hate you. Let's talk about electronic ride modes for a minute. Personally, other than off-road mode that turns off ABS and traction control, I have little use for things like rain mode, and honestly, I've never used it. I just keep my bike in road mode and control the power with my right wrist. Now, if you're a beginner and want to limit the response of your bike, I get it. But for more seasoned riders, just use your head and control the bike with your throttle. Right? You should have been doing that now for years. Another thing that you're going to have to deal with is vision. That is being able to see through the rain. For the most part, I don't have much problem with being able to see while I'm riding in the rain. First, I know that my visor is going to get covered with raindrops, so I just focus further up the road looking past the drops. Secondly, I set my windscreen so that it is lower than my line of sight. This allows air to come over the top of it, hit my visor, and help to push some of that water to the side. If I'm getting too much water on my face shield, I will actually stand up on occasion and let that wind just blast the water away. This is pretty effective. I think it's more effective than me trying to use that little squeegee thing on my gloves, although on occasion I have done that. I know some will suggest spraying your visor with something like Rain-X, and again, that's fine if you want to do that, but personally, I have never found that it's something I needed to do. Alright, I think that about covers it. Riding in the rain is not something we want to do, but if you were going to travel for any length of time on a motorcycle, well, you're gonna have to deal with it. Your only real choice is to be prepared, accept it, and do your best to enjoy it as part of the experience. As I said before, if you want to check out any of the great products that AEROSTICH has to offer, please use the link in the description of this video or on my website at livingofftheslab.com. I will get a small commission on each sale, and that helps to keep these videos coming, and of course you get great handcrafted products made right here in the good old USA. So until next time, ride safe, and of course, keep squeezing your lemon.